They left me at a gas station as a joke, so I joked my way into a first-class ticket to their eviction hearing. The group laughed as they drove away. I smiled and pulled out my phone. Then I called my lawyer. They posted it on social media. I posted their lease violations. They thought it was hilarious. I thought their credit scores needed adjusting. They had the cameras rolling. I had the contracts. All right, before we dive into this absolutely wild story, do me a favor, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. They abandoned a veteran for content. I abandoned my patience for justice. The Pilot Travel Center off Interstate 40 wasn't the worst place to be stranded, but it wasn't exactly where senior airman retired Elena Vasquez had planned to spend her Thursday afternoon. The autumn air in New Mexico carried that crisp bite that reminded her of overseas deployments when seasons changed whether you were ready or not. She stood beside pump number 7, her military-issued duffel bag at her feet, watching the taillights of Marcus's lifted Chevy disappear into traffic like red pinpricks against the desert horizon. 20 minutes earlier, she'd been cramped in the back seat between Marcus's girlfriend Brittany and his cousin Jake, listening to them plan their weekend at some music festival in Albuquerque. She'd offered to split gas money, like she always did. She'd brought snacks for the road, like she always did. She'd even downloaded offline maps on her phone in case they needed backup navigation, because in 12 years of military service, you learned that preparation saved lives, or at the very least, saved dignity. Marcus had pulled into the station, saying he needed to grab energy drinks and use the restroom. "Elena, can you pump the gas? I'll Venmo you." She'd nodded, already reaching for her wallet, already calculating the cost in her head. $38.47. She'd remember that number later, when numbers started mattering in ways she hadn't expected. While the tank filled, she'd watched through the store windows as Marcus and his crew huddled around his phone, shoulders shaking with suppressed laughter. Their body language had that electric quality of people sharing a secret, the kind of secret that usually meant someone else was about to become the punchline. Elena had seen it before, in high school, in basic training, in the mess halls of 3 different air bases. It was the same choreography of cruelty, refined over decades but never really changing. The pump clicked off. She'd replaced the nozzle, screwed the cap back on, and turned toward the store to find them. That's when she saw Marcus's truck pulling away from the far side of the lot, windows down, music up, all 4 occupants visible except for the empty space where she should have been sitting. For a moment, just one, Elena felt the familiar flutter of panic that came with being left behind. It was primal, evolutionary, the same fear that had kept humans alive when being separated from the tribe meant death in the wilderness. But the feeling lasted only seconds before her military training kicked in like muscle memory. Assess the situation, inventory your resources, develop a plan, execute with precision. She wasn't a 20-year-old private anymore, confused and homesick at her first duty station. She was a 43-year-old woman who'd coordinated supply drops in combat zones, who'd managed logistics for humanitarian missions, who'd once talked a suicidal soldier down from a rooftop in Qatar, using nothing but patience and understanding. If Marcus thought leaving her at the Pilot was going to reduce her to tears or desperate phone calls begging for rescue, he'd seriously miscalculated his target. Elena pulled out her phone, not to call for help, but to document. She opened her camera app and recorded a slow panoramic sweep of the gas station, the empty pump where Marcus's truck had been, the receipt still clutched in her hand showing the fuel purchase. Thursday, October 12th, 4:17 p.m., she said to the camera, her voice steady and clear. Pilot Travel Center, mile marker 242, Interstate 40 West. Just purchased $38.47 in gasoline for a vehicle that has now left without me. She ended the recording and immediately uploaded it to her cloud storage, a habit from her military days when documenting everything meant the difference between getting reimbursed for expenses and eating the cost yourself. But this wasn't about reimbursement. This was about creating a paper trail, because Elena had learned that the people who thought consequences were funny usually stopped laughing when those consequences arrived with official letterhead. Inside the travel center, she bought a large coffee, a protein bar, and 30 minutes of Wi-Fi. She found a booth near the window with a clear view of the parking lot and settled in like she was establishing a forward operating base. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. LMO, did you see your face? Check Insta, Elena. Didn't check Instagram. She opened her laptop instead and began typing, her fingers moving with the methodical precision of someone who'd written thousands of military reports. She started with basic facts: names, dates, locations, relationships. Marcus Delgado, 26, worked construction for his uncle's company. Lived in a rented duplex on Calle Verde with Brittany Martinez, 24, part-time server at Los Compadres restaurant. Jake Delgado, Marcus's cousin, 22, unemployed, technically homeless, but crashing on their couch for the past 4 months. Elena had met them through her neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, whose grandson Jake was going through a rough patch and needed some positive influences in his life. Elena had volunteered to include Jake in her weekend hiking group, figuring outdoor activity and structure might help him find direction. Marcus and Brittany had tagged along occasionally, and somehow Elena had become their unofficial chauffeur for group activities, their reliable source of gas money when funds ran short, their emergency contact when Jake got too drunk and needed someone responsible to ensure he got home safely. She'd never minded helping. Growing up poor in El Paso, she remembered what it felt like to need someone to believe in you, to invest in your potential when you couldn't invest in yourself. The military had given her that chance, and she'd always felt obligated to pay it forward. But there was a difference between helping someone and being used by them, a line she was only now realizing had been crossed months ago. Elena scrolled through her banking app, calculating expenses from the past 6 months. Gas money for trips she hadn't suggested, $423. Groceries she'd brought to their barbecues and game nights, $216. The time she'd covered their rent when Marcus got laid off for 2 weeks, $800, still unreimbursed despite his promises to pay her back next month for the past 3 months. Concert tickets she'd bought for Jake's birthday, $160 for an event she'd ended up not attending because they'd forgotten to save her a seat in their ride. The numbers added up to more than money. They represented a pattern of exploitation disguised as friendship, of generosity mistaken for stupidity. Elena had seen the same dynamic in military units where junior enlisted would take advantage of senior NCOs who tried to mentor them, bleeding, their good intentions dry before moving on to the next mark. She'd counseled those NCOs, helped them recognize the signs, warned them about setting boundaries. But somehow, she'd failed to apply her own advice to her civilian life. Her phone buzzed. Again. This time it was a notification from Instagram. Marcus D505 tagged you in a story. Elena's jaw tightened. She didn't have Instagram, but she knew how to access public posts through her browser. The video was exactly what she'd expected. Shaky, phone footage of Marcus pumping gas while narrating in a stage whisper, "Watch this. We're about to pull the funniest prank on Elena." The camera panned to show her standing by the pump, oblivious to what was being planned. Then it cut to them driving away, Brittany's laughter audible over the music, Jake whooping from the passenger seat. The caption read, "Left grandma at the gas station, prank, our veteran, stranded, hilarious, friendship, oops." Elena stared at the screen, grandma, at 43. Because helping people younger than yourself apparently made you elderly in their eyes, worth abandoning for entertainment. The comments were already rolling in, a mix of laughing emojis and concerned responses from people who didn't understand the context. But Elena understood perfectly. This wasn't a prank between friends. This was humiliation as performance art, her dignity sacrificed for social media engagement. She screenshot the post, saved the video to her phone, and began researching. Her military training had taught her that intelligence gathering was the foundation of any successful operation, and this was definitely about to become an operation. She started with public record searches, typing Marcus's name into the New Mexico court database. The results made her eyebrows rise. 3 traffic violations in the past year, all unpaid. A small claims judgment from his previous landlord for damages to a rental property. A garnishment notice for unpaid credit card debt. Elena dug deeper. Property records showed that Marcus and Brittany's duplex was owned by Pinnacle Property Management, a mid-sized company that managed about 40 rental units in the area. Their lease agreement, according to the property management company's website, included standard clauses about subletting, overnight guests, and the definition of permanent residence. Jake's 4-month stay on their couch without being added to the lease was a clear violation, one that could result in immediate eviction if the landlord chose to enforce it. But Elena wasn't interested in getting Jake evicted. She was interested in leverage. She opened a new browser tab and searched for Pinnacle Property Management's complaint procedures. Like most property management companies, they had an online portal where tenants and neighbors could report lease violations, noise complaints, and other issues. The system was designed to protect property values and ensure compliance with lease terms. It was also, Elena realized, a perfect tool for someone who understood how to work within established systems to achieve specific outcomes. Elena wasn't planning to destroy anyone's life. She was planning to teach a lesson about consequences, about the difference between humor and harm, about why you don't abandon someone who's been nothing but generous to you. The military had taught her that the most effective responses were proportional, strategic, and impossible to argue with. Emotional reactions could be dismissed as overreactions. Legal actions based on documented violations were much harder to ignore. Her phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the screen, probably calling to see if she'd cooled off enough to find their prank funny. Elena let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message. "Yo, Elena, come on, don't be like that. It was just a joke. We were going to come back for you, but Jake saw his ex at the casino and we had to make a detour. Call me back, we'll figure something out." Elena saved the voicemail and began typing another report, this one more detailed than the first. She documented the abandonment, the social media post, the pattern of financial exploitation, and Marcus's admission that they'd chosen to prioritize Jake's personal drama over her safety. She was methodical, professional, and absolutely thorough. By the time she finished, she had a comprehensive record of events that read less like a complaint and more like a legal brief. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the travel center parking lot in shades of orange and purple. Elena had been at the gas station for 3 hours, but she wasn't stranded anymore. She was strategically positioned with reliable Wi-Fi, access to public records, and all the time in the world to ensure that Marcus and his crew understood exactly what kind of person they'd decided to mess with. Elena Vasquez hadn't survived 12 years in the military by accepting disrespect quietly. She'd learned to channel anger into action, humiliation into strategy, and betrayal into leverage. Marcus thought he'd abandoned a helpless middle-aged woman at a gas station for laughs. What he'd actually done was give a retired senior airman, with extensive training in logistics, planning, and systematic problem-solving, a very good reason to demonstrate exactly why veterans deserved better treatment than they'd been receiving. Her phone buzzed with another Instagram notification. Marcus had posted a follow-up story. Update: Grandma's still at the gas station. Maybe she'll learn not to be so uptight about everything. Elena smiled for the first time since being abandoned. She opened her laptop and began drafting an email to Pinnacle Property Management's violation reporting system. The subject line read, "Urgent. Multiple lease violations at 247 Calle Verde, Unit B." She attached screenshots, photos, and a detailed timeline of events. Then she clicked send and started researching the contact information for Los Compadres. Restaurants management, because Brittany's social media posts had made it very clear that she'd been scheduling personal drama during work hours, posting from the restaurant, and generally representing her employer in ways that probably violated their social media policies. Marcus had wanted to make Elena the punchline of his joke, but Elena had spent years learning that the person who laughs last is usually the person who did their homework first. And Elena always did her homework. The desert sky had deepened to indigo by the time Elena finally left the Pilot Travel Center, but not because someone had rescued her. She'd called a rideshare, tipped the driver well, and arrived at her small adobe house on the outskirts of Santa Fe just after 9 p.m. The house sat on 2 acres of scrubland she'd bought with her VA loan, far enough from neighbors to enjoy genuine quiet, but close enough to town for reliable internet. It was exactly the kind of place a person chose when they valued peace over proximity, solitude over social obligations. Elena had moved here 18 months ago, after retiring from Kirtland Air Force Base with full benefits and a pension that allowed her to live modestly but comfortably. The house needed work. The kitchen cabinets were original 1970s particle board. The bathroom tile was an unfortunate shade of avocado green, and the heating system made concerning noises during winter months. But the bones were solid, the roof didn't leak, and the wraparound porch faced west toward mountains that turned purple at sunset. It was hers, paid for with money she'd earned, and nobody could take it away from her or abandon her there as a joke. She set her duffel bag by the front door and walked straight to her home office, a converted bedroom where she handled her consulting, work for small businesses trying to streamline their logistics operations. The military had taught her systems thinking, process improvement, and project management, skills that translated surprisingly well to helping local companies optimize their supply chains, reduce waste, and improve efficiency. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was intellectually satisfying and allowed her to work remotely with clients across the Southwest. More importantly, it had taught her to approach problems methodically, breaking complex situations down into manageable components that could be analyzed, prioritized, and addressed systematically. What Marcus and his crew had done to her wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was a logistics problem with multiple variables, stakeholders, and potential solutions. Elena had spent years solving much more complicated problems under significantly more pressure. This one just happened to be personal. She booted up her desktop computer, a custom-built machine with enough processing power to run complex modeling software and multiple virtual machines simultaneously. Old habits from her military intelligence days died hard, and Elena had always believed in having redundant systems, encrypted backups, and more computing power than she technically needed. Tonight, that overcautiousness was going to serve her well. Elena opened a new spreadsheet and began building what she privately called her situation analysis matrix. In the military, every operation started with intelligence gathering, threat assessment, and resource allocation. This situation would be no different. She created columns for names, relationships, vulnerabilities, assets, and potential pressure points. Then she began filling in the details with the methodical precision of someone who'd spent years turning raw information into actionable intelligence. Marcus Delgado occupied the first row. Age 26, employed by Delgado Construction, owned by his uncle Roberto. Elena had met Roberto twice at family barbecues Jake had invited her to, and she remembered him as a soft-spoken man who took pride in running an honest business and treating his employees fairly. Roberto probably had no idea that his nephew was using company tools for personal projects, or that Marcus had been bragging on social media about side jobs he was doing without proper licensing or insurance. Elena made a note to revisit that angle later. Marcus's financial situation was more precarious than his social media presence suggested. The court records she'd found earlier painted a picture of someone living paycheck to paycheck, accumulating debt, and making impulsive decisions that created long-term problems. His truck payments were probably substantial. Lifted pickups weren't cheap, and the custom wheels and sound system Elena had noticed suggested someone who prioritized appearance over financial stability. The traffic violations were small individually, but expensive cumulatively, especially with late fees and potential license suspension looming. Brittany Martinez presented different vulnerabilities. Her employment at Los Compadres restaurant appeared to be her primary income source, and service industry jobs were notoriously unstable. Elena had noticed during their previous interactions that Brittany was often stressed about scheduling conflicts, requesting time off, and managing the unpredictable nature of tip-based income. More concerning was Brittany's tendency to document her entire life on social media, including photos taken during work hours, complaints about customers and management, and posts that revealed she was often hungover or sick when calling in to work. Elena opened Brittany's Instagram profile and began scrolling backward through months of posts. The pattern that emerged was troubling from an employment perspective. Frequent sick days that coincided with parties or late nights, photos of elaborate meals and shopping trips that seemed inconsistent with a server's income, and a general attitude toward work that suggested she viewed her job as an inconvenience rather than a responsibility. Elena screenshot several particularly problematic posts, including one where Brittany had photographed her schedule and complained about her manager being such a bitch about coverage. Jake Delgado was the wild card in the equation. Officially unemployed, unofficially couch surfing, and apparently content to let others subsidize his lifestyle while he figured out his next move. Elena had initially felt sorry for Jake, recognizing something of her younger self in his directionless frustration. Growing up poor had taught her that sometimes people needed help to get back on their feet, and she genuinely wanted to provide that support. But Elena's military experience had also taught her to recognize the difference between someone going through a rough patch and someone who'd learned to weaponize other people's sympathy. Jake had been temporarily staying with Marcus and Brittany for 4 months, contributing nothing to rent or utilities while sleeping on their couch and eating their food. He'd been looking for work the entire time but seemed to have very specific requirements about scheduling, pay rates, and job responsibilities that made him unsuitable for most available positions. More problematically, Jake's presence in the duplex violated the lease agreement in several ways. Elena had downloaded a copy of Pinnacle Property Management's standard lease language from their website, and the violations were clear and substantial. Subletting required written approval from the landlord. Guests were limited to 14 consecutive days without being added as official tenants. Anyone staying longer than 2 weeks needed to complete a background check and credit screening. Jake had been there for 16 weeks without any of those requirements being met. Elena leaned back in her chair and considered her options. She could file complaints about the lease violations and probably get them evicted within 30 days. She could report Brittany's social media activity to Los Compadres management and likely get her fired. She could provide Roberto Delgado with evidence of his nephew's unprofessional conduct and potentially get Marcus terminated. Any of those actions would create immediate consequences for the people who'd thought abandoning her was hilarious. But Elena wasn't interested in immediate consequences. She was interested in proportional consequences, in teaching a lesson that would actually change behavior rather than just create temporary discomfort. The military had taught her that the most effective discipline was educational rather than purely punitive, designed to prevent future problems rather than just address current ones. She opened a new document and began drafting what she thought of as her engagement strategy. The goal wasn't to destroy anyone's life, it was to demonstrate that actions had consequences, that kindness shouldn't be mistaken for weakness, and that veterans deserved the same respect they'd shown their country. Elena wanted Marcus, Brittany, and Jake to understand that the person they'd abandoned at a gas station for social media content was someone who'd spent 12 years defending their right to make stupid decisions, and that her patience with their particular brand of stupidity had reached its limit. Phase 1 would focus on natural consequences. Elena wouldn't file any official complaints immediately. But she would ensure that the relevant authorities were aware of the violations and ready to act if the situation escalated. She drafted emails to Pinnacle Property Management, Los Compadres, Restaurant, and the New Mexico Department of Labor, detailing the various policy violations she'd observed. She saved these emails as drafts, ready to send if Marcus and his crew decided to double down on their disrespectful behavior. Phase 2 involved documentation and leverage. Elena had already begun collecting evidence of the financial exploitation, social media harassment, and lease violations. She would continue building this file, creating an irrefutable record of their conduct that could be used to support any future legal actions. The key was to be thorough, professional, and completely above reproach in her methods. Phase 3 was about community consequences. Elena had noticed that Marcus, Brittany, and Jake were all heavily invested in their social media presence and local reputation. They cared about how they were perceived by their peers, their families, and their community. Elena had connections throughout the local veteran community, the small business network, and various civic organizations. Word traveled fast in a place like Santa Fe, especially when it involved disrespecting someone who'd served in the military. Elena wasn't planning to launch a campaign of gossip or harassment. She was planning to tell the truth about what had happened when asked, and let natural social consequences unfold. Veterans took care of each other, and the broader community generally supported veterans when they were treated poorly. Marcus had filmed himself abandoning a retired service member for laughs and posted it on social media. Elena didn't need to destroy his reputation. He'd already done that himself. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Rodriguez. "Mija, Jake called asking if you made it home okay. He sounded worried. What happened today?" Elena stared at the message for a long moment. Mrs. Rodriguez was a sweet woman who genuinely cared about her grandson and had no idea what kind of person he was becoming. Elena had been protecting her from Jake's worse impulses for months, covering for him when he made poor decisions, helping him avoid consequences that might have actually helped him grow up. That protection had been a mistake, enabling behavior that had ultimately led to today's humiliation. She typed back, "I'm fine, Mrs. Rodriguez. Jake and his friends played a prank that went too far. I'm handling it appropriately." The response came quickly. "What kind of prank?" "Jake's been in trouble. Before? Should I talk to his mother?" Elena considered her options. She could tell Mrs. Rodriguez exactly what had happened and let family dynamics sort out the consequences. She could show her the social media posts and let her see how her grandson and his friends had treated someone who'd shown them nothing but kindness. She could explain that Jake's temporary living situation was actually a lease violation that could get Marcus and Brittany evicted. Instead, she typed, "Let me handle this first. If I need family intervention, I'll let you know." Elena wasn't protecting Jake anymore, but she wasn't ready to involve his family in what was about to unfold. This was between her and the 3 people who'd thought her dignity was worth sacrificing for social media engagement. They'd made their choice when they drove away from that gas station. Now Elena was going to make hers. She spent the next 2 hours refining her documentation, cross-referencing public records, and building a comprehensive file that detailed every financial transaction, every favor, every instance of generosity that had been taken for granted over the past 6 months. The numbers were even worse than she'd initially calculated. Between direct financial support, unpaid debts, and services provided without compensation, Elena had invested nearly $3,000 in people who'd repaid her kindness by abandoning her at a gas station for laughs. $3,000 would cover a month's rent for most people, or a significant car repair, or several months of groceries. Elena had given them the equivalent of a substantial gift, spread out over time in ways that made it easy to forget or minimize. But Elena hadn't forgotten, and her military training had taught her to document everything important. She had receipts, bank records, text messages, and photos that proved every claim she might need to make. By midnight, Elena had assembled a comprehensive dossier that would make any military intelligence analyst proud. She had personal information, financial records, employment details, social media evidence, legal vulnerabilities, and character assessments for all three individuals who'd decided to make her the subject of their entertainment. She had draft emails ready to send to their landlord, employers, and family members. She had contact information for local news, outlets that might be interested in a story about veterans being mistreated by people they'd tried to help. But Elena didn't send anything that night. Instead, she saved all her work to an encrypted folder, backed it up to 3 different cloud services, and went to bed. Tomorrow, Marcus and his crew would wake up expecting her to either beg for their forgiveness or slink away in embarrassment. They had no idea that they'd just handed a trained military logistician all the time and motivation she needed to plan their systematic downfall. Elena slept better than she had in months. Elena woke at 05:30 hours, the same time she'd opened her eyes every morning for the past 15 years. Military schedules carved grooves in your circadian rhythm that civilian life never quite smoothed away, and she'd long since stopped fighting the habit. The high desert dawn was crisp and clear, with that particular quality of light that made everything look sharp-edged and precisely defined. It seemed appropriate for what she had planned. She made coffee in the French press she'd bought herself for Christmas 2 years ago, back when she was still trying to justify small luxuries after decades of military frugality. The coffee was good, single-origin beans from a local roaster who sourced directly from farmers in Guatemala. Elena had learned to appreciate quality over quantity in her retirement, choosing fewer but better things rather than accumulating possessions she didn't need or want. While the coffee steeped, she checked her phone for the first time since going to bed. 7 missed calls from Marcus, scattered between midnight and 3 a.m. 3 text messages that escalated from casual dismissal to frustrated confusion to something approaching concern. The voicemails told the same story. Marcus had expected her to either laugh off the prank by now or come crawling back with apologies for being too sensitive about their humor. The first message was pure bravado. "Come on, Elena, don't be dramatic. It was funny. You've got to admit it was a little funny." The second showed irritation. "Look, we get that you're mad, but we were always going to come back for you. Jake's ex was being crazy and we had to deal with that first. You know how it is." The third revealed genuine confusion. "Okay, you're really not answering. Are you actually pissed about this? It was just a joke. We joke around all the time. Elena." Deleted the voicemails without responding. She had no interest in explaining why abandoning someone at a gas station wasn't humorous, or why filming it for social media made it worse, or why their excuses revealed exactly the kind of people they'd always been. Her silence wasn't passive aggression, it was strategic patience. Let them wonder. Let them worry. Let them start to understand that they'd miscalculated something fundamental about the person they'd chosen to humiliate. She opened her laptop and began her morning routine of checking news, weather, and market reports. But today she added a new element: social media monitoring. Elena had created fake accounts on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok specifically for intelligence gathering, using a VPN and anonymous email addresses to maintain operational security. The accounts looked legitimate enough to avoid detection, but were completely untraceable to her real identity. Marcus had posted 3 more times since yesterday evening. The first was a repost of the original gas station video with additional commentary. "Some people can't take a joke. Maybe don't be so serious all the time, Grandma." The second was a photo of him, Brittany, and Jake at some bar, raising drinks toward the camera with the caption, "Living our best life while others cry about pranks." The third post made Elena's jaw tighten. It was a screenshot of his unanswered text messages to her with his commentary, "When you try to apologize but someone's too stuck up to accept it. Guess military people really can't relax. Dramatic star veteran can take a joke." Elena screenshot all 3 posts, noting the timestamps and engagement metrics. Marcus was doubling down on his narrative that she was overreacting, trying to rally his social circle to his side by painting her as humorless and uptight. The comments were a mixed bag, some people defending the prank as harmless fun, others expressing concern about abandoning someone, and a few veterans who were clearly not amused by Marcus's characterization of military personnel. One comment in particular caught Elena's attention. It was from Roberto Delgado, Marcus's uncle and employer. "Mijo, maybe take this down. This doesn't look good." Marcus had responded, "It's fine, Tio. She's being dramatic. She'll get over it." Elena made a note of the exchange. Roberto clearly understood that his nephew's behavior reflected poorly on the family business, but Marcus was too invested in his narrative to listen to wiser counsel. That generational divide might prove useful if Elena needed to escalate her response. She opened her consulting calendar and reviewed her appointments for the day. 2 client calls scheduled for the afternoon, both routine check-ins that could be rescheduled if necessary. Elena preferred to keep her schedule flexible during the first week of any new project, and this situation definitely qualified as a project requiring dedicated attention and resources. At 8 a.m., Elena made her first call of the day. Not to Marcus, not to his friends, but to her own network of contacts throughout the local business community. The call went to Sarah Martinez, owner of Desert Rose Public Relations, who handled marketing and crisis management for several prominent Santa Fe businesses. "Sarah, it's Elena Vasquez. I hope I'm not calling too early." "Elena, not at all. I've been up since 5 working on a presentation." "How's retirement treating you?" "Mostly well. I'm actually calling because I need some advice about a social media situation. Someone I know posted some content that reflects poorly on their employer, and I'm wondering about the best way to bring it to management's attention." Sarah's tone shifted to professional interest. "What kind of content are we talking about?" Elena described the situation objectively, focusing on the social media posts rather than her personal feelings about being abandoned. She mentioned the implications for Roberto's construction business, the potential liability issues, and the way Marcus was using his family connection to justify behavior that could damage their reputation. "That's definitely problematic," Sarah agreed. "Small construction companies live and die by their reputation, especially in a tight community like Santa Fe. Roberto Delgado runs a good operation. I've worked with them on a couple of projects. He'd want to know if his nephew was creating liability exposure. What's the most professional way to approach this?" "Email him directly, but frame it as a business concern rather than a personal complaint. Include screenshots, but let the content speak for itself. Roberto's smart enough to understand the implications without you having to spell them out." Elena thanked Sarah and ended the call, then drafted a carefully worded email to Roberto Delgado. She introduced herself as someone who'd worked with Marcus on community projects, expressed concern about social media posts that mentioned his business, and attached screenshots of the relevant content. The tone was professional, respectful, and focused on protecting Roberto's interests rather than punishing Marcus. She sent the email and moved on to her next task, researching Los Compadres, restaurants' management structure and social media policies. Most service industry employers had strict guidelines about employee conduct on social media, especially when it involved posting during work hours or making negative comments about customers and colleagues. Elena found the restaurant's website and noted the management team. Carlos and Maria Gutierrez, owners who'd operated the restaurant for 12 years and took pride in providing authentic New Mexican cuisine and exceptional customer service. Their staff page included photos of long-term employees, suggesting they valued loyalty and professionalism. The website also included links to their social media accounts, which featured polished content focused on food, atmosphere, and positive customer experiences. Brittany's Instagram presence would be jarring to employers who cared about professional image. Elena had documented posts that showed Brittany complaining about work, photographing her schedule, making derogatory comments about customers, and posting from the restaurant during shift hours. Any one of those violations might be overlooked, but the pattern suggested an employee who didn't understand or respect professional boundaries. Elena drafted another professional email, this one to Carlos and Maria Gutierrez. She introduced herself as a frequent customer who'd noticed concerning social media activity from one of their employees. She attached screenshots of the most problematic posts, expressed concern about the potential impact on the restaurant's reputation, and offered to discuss the matter further if they found it helpful. Before sending either email, Elena took a walk around her property to clear her head and ensure her judgment wasn't clouded by personal anger. The 2 acres of scrubland stretched toward distant mountains, dotted with juniper trees and native grasses that had learned to thrive in challenging conditions. Elena had always felt kinship with desert plants, tough, resilient, and beautiful, in ways that required closer observation to appreciate. The walk helped her gain perspective. What Marcus and his friends had done was cruel and disrespectful, but it wasn't the end of the world. Elena had survived much worse during her military service, and she'd helped other people survive worse as well. This situation was manageable, containable, and ultimately solvable through the application of appropriate pressure at strategic points. The goal wasn't revenge, it was education. Elena wanted Marcus, Brittany, and Jake to understand that their actions had consequences, that other people's dignity wasn't acceptable collateral damage for their entertainment, and that veterans deserved better treatment than they'd received. If those lessons came with professional and financial consequences, that was appropriate given the severity of their behavior. Elena returned to her house and sent both emails, then began phase 2 of her morning routine: legal research. She wanted to understand her options if the situation escalated beyond informal social and professional consequences. New Mexico had strong protections for veterans, including specific statutes addressing discrimination and harassment based on military service. The state's Human Rights Act included provisions that could apply to Elena's situation, particularly if Marcus continued posting content that portrayed veterans negatively or encouraged others to treat them with disrespect. While the gas station incident itself might not rise to the level of legal action, the pattern of behavior combined with the social media campaign could potentially constitute harassment under state law. Elena wasn't planning to file any legal complaints immediately, but she wanted to understand her options and ensure she was documenting everything properly in case the situation required escalation. She created a new folder in her encrypted files and began saving screenshots, messages, and other evidence with timestamps and detailed descriptions of context. Her phone rang at 10:30. Marcus again. This time, Elena answered on the 4th ring, her voice calm and professional. "Hello, Marcus? Elena?" Finally, "Look, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We weren't trying to hurt you yesterday. It was just supposed to be funny. I understand exactly what you were trying to do. Come on, don't be like that. Jake feels really bad about it. We all do. Can't we just move past this?" Elena let the silence stretch for several seconds before responding. "You filmed yourselves abandoning me at a gas station, posted it on social media with mocking commentary, and then spent the evening making additional posts about how I was overreacting to your joke. Which part of that suggests you feel bad about it?" Look, maybe the posts were too much, but the original thing was harmless. We were always going to come back for you." "When?" "After you finished your business at the casino? After you dealt with Jake's personal drama? After you decided I'd been punished enough for whatever imaginary offense justified abandoning me in the first place?" Marcus's voice took on a defensive edge. "It wasn't like that. You're making it sound worse than it was. I'm describing exactly what happened, based on your own documentation. You chose to prioritize Jake's ex-girlfriend drama over my safety and well-being. You chose to film it for social media content. You chose to mock my reaction and characterize veterans as unable to take a joke. Those were all conscious decisions on your part. Okay, maybe we screwed up. What do you want from us? An apology? We're sorry, all right? Elena considered her response carefully. An apology offered only after consequences began materializing wasn't really an apology. It was damage control. But she was curious to see how far Marcus was willing to go to contain the situation. I want you to take down all the social media posts related to yesterday's incident. Done. What else? I want you to post a public apology acknowledging that what you did was inappropriate and disrespectful to someone who's shown you nothing but kindness. There was a long pause. That seems kind of extreme. More extreme than abandoning someone at a gas station for social media content? Fine, whatever. I'll post something. Are we good after that? Elena almost smiled. Marcus still didn't understand the situation he'd created. He thought this was a negotiation where he could offer minimal concessions in exchange for returning to the status quo. He had no idea that Elena was already 3 moves ahead, with contingency plans that would unfold regardless of what he posted or didn't post on social media. We'll see, Elena said, and hung up. 20 minutes later, Marcus had deleted the original gas station video and posted a brief, grudging apology. Sorry if anyone was offended by yesterday's post. It was just meant to be funny, but I guess some people took it wrong. Elena screenshot the apology before Marcus could delete or modify it, noting that it fell far short of taking responsibility for his actions. The phrase, sorry if anyone was offended, was classic non-apology language that shifted blame to the victims rather than acknowledging wrongdoing. The characterization of abandonment as something meant to be funny showed Marcus still didn't understand why his behavior was problematic. But Elena hadn't expected genuine remorse or meaningful accountability from someone who thought abandoning people was entertainment. She'd wanted to see how Marcus responded under pressure, and his half-hearted damage control told her everything. She needed to know about his character and judgment. Her laptop chimed with new email notifications. Roberto Delgado had responded within 2 hours. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. I'll handle this situation immediately. Carlos. Gutierrez from Los Compadres had replied even faster. We appreciate you reaching out. This is definitely not acceptable behavior from our employees. We'll address this today. Elena leaned back in her chair and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Phase 1 was proceeding exactly as planned. Marcus thought he'd contained the situation with a weak apology and deleted posts. But the real consequences were just beginning to unfold. By the end of the day, he'd discover that actions had professional ramifications that extended far beyond social media drama, and Elena was just getting started. Elena spent the afternoon working on legitimate consulting projects, reviewing supply chain optimization reports for a small manufacturing company in Albuquerque, and participating in a conference call about inventory management systems. The routine work helped maintain her professional equilibrium while her personal situation unfolded in the background like a slow-motion explosion. She'd lit several fuses that morning, and now she could afford to wait patiently for the inevitable detonations. At 3:15, her phone buzzed with a text from Jake. Elena. "WTF did you do? Marcus got fired and Brittany's freaking out. This is way too far." Elena read the message twice, then set her phone aside without responding. She'd expected professional consequences to materialize quickly. Small businesses couldn't afford employees who created liability exposure or damaged their reputation. What she hadn't anticipated was Jake's immediate assumption that she was responsible for whatever had happened to his friends. The assumption revealed something interesting about Jake's understanding of cause and effect. He didn't seem to grasp that Marcus and Brittany's employment problems were direct results of their own documented behavior, not Elena's vindictive manipulation. Jake saw Elena's involvement as illegitimate interference rather than natural consequences catching up with people who'd made poor choices. Elena opened her laptop and checked her fake social media accounts to see what had actually transpired. Marcus's Instagram story from 2 hours ago told part of the story. Lost my job today because someone can't take a joke. Some people are just bitter and want to drag everyone down with them. The post had already accumulated dozens of comments, mostly from friends expressing outrage on Marcus's behalf and demanding to know who had gotten him fired. Brittany's Instagram was more revealing. Her most recent post was a tearful selfie with the caption, "Worst day ever. Got called into the office because of social media conduct, and now I'm looking for a new job. I guess helping friends isn't worth it if they turn around and stab you in the back. Some people have no loyalty." Elena screenshot both posts, noting that neither Marcus nor Brittany had acknowledged any connection between their behavior and their employment consequences. They both framed the situation as unfair persecution by a vindictive former friend, rather than accountability for documented policy violations their employers had discovered. More interesting was what the posts revealed about their financial vulnerability. Marcus's reference to losing his job suggested immediate economic pressure. Construction workers were typically paid weekly, and missing even one paycheck could create serious problems for someone already struggling with debt and late fees. Brittany's job search panic indicated she'd been living paycheck to paycheck as well, without savings to cushion the transition between positions. Elena felt a momentary flicker of something that might have been sympathy, quickly replaced by harder satisfaction. She'd offered these people genuine friendship, financial support, and professional guidance over the past 6 months. They'd repaid her generosity by treating her dignity as disposable entertainment, then doubled down on their disrespect when she failed to laugh along with their cruelty. If losing their jobs taught them that actions had consequences, that other people deserved basic respect, and that veterans weren't acceptable targets for humiliation, then the professional consequences had served their intended educational purpose. Elena wasn't responsible for their poor financial planning, any more than she was responsible for their poor character judgment. Her phone rang at 4 o'clock. Roberto Delgado's name appeared on the screen, and Elena answered promptly. "Ms. Vasquez, this is Roberto Delgado from Delgado Construction. Thank you for your email this morning. I wanted to follow up personally." "Of course, Mr. Delgado. I hope I didn't overstep by reaching out directly." "Not at all. You did exactly the right thing. I had no idea Marcus was posting that kind of content or associating our business with his personal drama. I can't afford to have employees creating liability exposure, especially not family members who should know better." Elena appreciated Roberto's directness. "I understand that family business situations can be complicated." They are, but this crossed a line. Abandoning someone at a gas station isn't funny. It's dangerous and cruel. Posting about it on social media while wearing company clothing makes it a business problem. I had to let him go immediately. That must have been a difficult decision. Roberto sighed audibly. "Marcus is my brother's son, and I've been trying to help him build a career in construction. But he's never understood that representing our company means more than just showing up to work sites. Your reputation follows you everywhere in this business, and his behavior reflects on all of us." Elena chose her words carefully. "I hope this situation helps him understand the importance of professional conduct. Maybe it will, but that's not your problem anymore. I also wanted to apologize personally for what he did to you. Military service deserves respect, not mockery. If there's anything I can do to make this right, please let me know." After ending the call, Elena felt genuinely impressed by Roberto's handling of the situation. He'd understood immediately that Marcus's behavior created business risks, taken swift action to protect his company's reputation, and reached out personally to apologize for his nephew's conduct. It demonstrated the kind of principled leadership that built successful businesses and strong communities. Marcus, unfortunately, seemed incapable of that level of self-awareness or accountability. His social media posts continued throughout the afternoon, each one revealing deeper layers of entitlement and victim mentality. He'd created a narrative where Elena was a vengeful harpy who'd destroyed his livelihood over a harmless prank, completely ignoring his own role in documenting and publicizing behavior that any reasonable employer would find problematic. At 5:30, Elena's phone buzzed with a call from an unknown local number. She answered cautiously. "Elena, this is Carlos Gutierrez from Los Compadres restaurant. I believe you sent us an email this morning about one of our employees." "Yes, Mr. Gutierrez. Thank you for calling. I wanted to thank you for bringing Brittany's social media activity to our attention. We had no idea she'd been posting negative content about our customers and workplace during her shifts. That kind of behavior is completely unacceptable in our industry." Elena had eaten at Los Compadres several times and always appreciated their commitment to quality and customer service. "I imagine maintaining professional standards is especially important in restaurant work." "Absolutely. Our reputation depends on every interaction customers have with our staff, both in person and online. Brittany's posts about hating her job, complaining about customers, and taking photos during work hours created serious concerns about her commitment to professional service. I understand that those situations require immediate attention. They do. We had to terminate her employment this afternoon. I also wanted to apologize for any negative experience you may have had that wasn't properly addressed through our normal channels. Customer feedback is always welcome, and we appreciate you taking the time to bring this to our attention." After Carlos hung up, Elena reflected on the day's developments. Both employers had responded swiftly and decisively to protect their businesses from liability and reputation damage. Neither Roberto nor Carlos seemed to view Elena's communications as vindictive complaints. They understood them as legitimate business concerns that required immediate action. The contrast between the employers' professionalism and their former employees' reactions was stark. Roberto and Carlos had taken responsibility for addressing problems within their organizations, while Marcus and Brittany had blamed Elena for consequences that stemmed directly from their own documented behavior. Elena's phone started ringing, more frequently as the afternoon progressed. Jake called 3 times, leaving increasingly agitated voicemails about Elena ruining people's lives and going too far. Mrs. Rodriguez called once, asking if Elena knew why Jake seemed so upset about something involving Marcus and Brittany's jobs. Elena told her honestly that she didn't know all the details, but suggested Mrs. Rodriguez speak directly with her grandson about whatever was troubling him. The most interesting call came from Brittany herself at 7 p.m. Elena almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out over caution. "Elena, please, I need to talk to you." Brittany's voice was thick with tears and barely controlled panic. "I'm listening." "I lost my job today because of those Instagram posts. Carlos said you sent them. Screenshots of stuff I posted about work. Why would you do that to me?" Elena considered several possible responses, ultimately choosing directness over diplomacy. "Your posts violated your employer's social media policies. I didn't create that content. You did. But you sent it to them. You got me fired on purpose. I shared publicly available information with business owners who had legitimate interests in their employees' professional conduct. Your posts were visible to anyone who visited your Instagram profile. That's not the same thing. You specifically tried to get me in trouble." Elena felt her patience thinning. "Brittany, you posted complaints about your job, your coworkers, your customers, and your manager on a public social media platform. You took photos during work hours and shared content that reflected poorly on your employer's business. Those were your choices, not mine. You're supposed to be our friend. Friends don't try to destroy each other." The word friend hung in the air like an accusation, and Elena felt something cold and final settle in her chest. Friends don't abandon each other at gas stations for social media content either. That was just a joke. We were always going to come back for you. When? After Jake's personal drama was resolved? After you'd gotten enough entertainment value from my humiliation? After you'd finished celebrating how funny it was to leave a veteran stranded? Brittany's voice rose defensively. "You're making it sound worse than it was. We weren't trying to hurt you. You filmed it, posted it online, mocked my reaction, and characterized me as an uptight grandmother who couldn't take a joke. Which part of that suggests you cared about my feelings or well-being? Look, maybe we could have handled it better, but getting us fired was way too far. Now Marcus can't make his truck payments and I can't afford my half of rent. We might get evicted. Elena almost laughed at the transparent attempt to manipulate her through guilt. Your financial problems are consequences of your employment decisions, not my responsibility to solve. Come on, Elena. You know we're good people. Who made a mistake? Can't you call Carlos and Roberto and tell them it was all a misunderstanding? Even if I wanted to help you, which I don't. Employers who fire people for social media violations don't typically reverse those decisions based on character references from the people who reported the violations. Brittany's voice turned desperate. Then what do you want from us? What will it take to make this stop? Elena considered the question seriously. What did she want? An apology that demonstrated genuine understanding of why their behavior was wrong. Financial reimbursement for the money they'd never repaid. Assurance that they'd learned something from the consequences they'd experienced. Looking at the situation objectively, Elena realized she didn't want anything from them anymore. Their phone calls and messages revealed people who remained fundamentally unable to connect their actions with their consequences, who viewed accountability as persecution and natural consequences as unfair punishment. They were incapable of the kind of reflection and growth that might make reconciliation possible or worthwhile. I don't want anything from you, Brittany. I wanted to be treated with basic respect and consideration, but that ship sailed when you decided my dignity was worth sacrificing for social media entertainment. So that's it? You're just going to destroy our lives over one stupid mistake? I'm not destroying anything. You documented your own behavior, created your own liability exposure, and violated your own employer's policies. I simply ensured that the relevant decision-makers had access to information that was already publicly available. Elena hung up before Brittany could respond, then immediately blocked all 3 phone numbers. She'd heard enough self-serving justifications, enough attempts to reframe their accountability as her vindictiveness, enough demands that she fix problems they'd created for themselves. The house felt quieter after she'd cut off their access to her phone, as if blocking their numbers had also blocked their chaos from contaminating her space. Elena made herself dinner. Grilled salmon with roasted vegetables and a glass of Pinot Grigio she'd been saving for a special occasion. Getting Marcus and Brittany fired wasn't exactly cause for celebration, but reclaiming her boundaries felt worth acknowledging with something better than her usual weeknight meal. As she ate, Elena reflected on the day's events with the same analytical detachment she'd once applied to after-action reports following military operations. The morning's intelligence gathering had produced actionable information. Her communications with the employers had been professional, factual, and effective. The targets had responded predictably to pressure, revealing their true characters through their reactions to consequences. Most importantly, Elena had maintained complete operational security throughout the process. She'd documented everything, stayed within legal boundaries, and ensured that her actions could withstand scrutiny from any reasonable observer. If Marcus, Brittany, or Jake tried to retaliate or escalate the situation, Elena had comprehensive records that would support her position and demonstrate the proportionality of her response. But Elena didn't think they'd escalate beyond angry phone calls and social media complaints. They were discovering that their actions had consequences, that their behavior had been documented and distributed to people who mattered in their professional lives. The lesson was expensive but appropriate, maybe expensive enough to actually change their future behavior. Elena finished her wine and began planning the next phase of her campaign. Marcus and Brittany losing their jobs was satisfying, but it was also just the beginning. She still had Jake to deal with, and his lease violation situation offered opportunities for education that she hadn't fully explored yet. Tomorrow, she'd begin researching Pinnacle Property Management's enforcement procedures and tenant rights policies. Tonight, though, Elena would sleep well in her own bed, in her own house, surrounded by her own things and her own choices. No one could abandon her here, no one could mock her here, and no one could treat her dignity as disposable entertainment. She'd created a space where respect was the minimum standard, and anyone who couldn't meet that standard was welcome to find the exit. Elena's morning routine began at dawn with coffee and systematic review of overnight developments. Marcus had posted 17 Instagram stories between midnight and 6 a.m., a digital meltdown documented in real time that revealed the depth of his financial panic. The stories ranged from angry rants about fake friends who stab you in the back to increasingly desperate job search updates, culminating in a 3 a.m. post offering to do construction work, under the table, cash only, no questions asked. Each post provided additional evidence of Marcus's inability to understand professional boundaries or learn from consequences. The offer to perform unlicensed construction work was particularly damaging. It suggested he was willing to violate building codes, tax regulations, and insurance requirements to make quick money. Elena screenshot every story, noting timestamps, and saving them to her growing documentation file. Marcus was creating a comprehensive record of his own poor judgment that would be valuable if the situation required further escalation. Brittany's social media presence had taken a different trajectory. Her posts were fewer but more strategically manipulative, designed to generate sympathy from friends and family who didn't know the full context of recent events. She'd crafted a narrative of persecution by a vindictive older woman who couldn't take a joke and had deliberately destroyed her livelihood out of spite. The posts were carefully edited to remove any reference to the original gas station incident, focusing instead on Elena's supposed overreaction to harmless fun. Elena found Brittany's revisionist storytelling more concerning than Marcus's chaotic, emotional outbursts. It demonstrated calculated dishonesty rather than impulsive poor judgment, suggesting someone who understood exactly what she'd done wrong but preferred manipulation to accountability. Brittany was actively trying to rebuild her reputation by rewriting history, positioning herself as a victim of Elena's cruelty rather than accepting responsibility for behavior that had violated her employer's policies. At 8 a.m., Elena received an unexpected phone call from Detective Maria Santos of the Santa Fe Police Department. Elena answered with immediate alertness. Military training had taught her that law enforcement contact usually meant either emergency or investigation, neither of which could be ignored. Ms. Vasquez, I'm calling about a complaint we received regarding harassment and cyberstalking. The reporting party claims you've been systematically targeting them and their friends through social media monitoring and contact with their employers. Elena felt her pulse quicken but kept her voice steady. I see. Who filed this complaint? Marcus Delgado, supported by statements from Brittany Martinez and Jake Delgado. They're alleging that you've engaged in a campaign of harassment following what they describe as a minor social disagreement. Elena had anticipated this possibility. People who faced consequences for their actions often tried to reframe accountability as persecution, especially when they had limited understanding of legal definitions or processes. Detective Santos, I'd be happy to discuss this situation with you. Would you prefer to handle this over the phone or should I come to the station? Let's start with a phone conversation. Can you tell me your version of what's been happening? Elena spent the next 20 minutes providing a calm, factual account of recent events. She described the gas station abandonment, the social media posts mocking her reaction, the documented pattern of financial exploitation, and her communications with employers about publicly available information that violated workplace policies. She offered to provide documentation for every claim, including screenshots, bank records, and saved social media content. Detective Santos listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions that demonstrated professional skepticism about the complainant's narrative. When Elena finished her account, there was a long pause before the detective responded. Ms. Vasquez, I have to ask, Did you have any direct contact with Mr. Delgado or Ms. Martinez's employers beyond sharing information they had posted publicly on social media? No direct contact beyond professional emails that shared publicly. Available information with business owners who had legitimate interests in their employees' conduct. And you didn't make any threats, engage in any stalking behavior, or attempt to intimidate anyone involved? Absolutely not. All my communications were professional and focused on documented policy violations that were already visible to anyone with social media access. Detective Santos sighed audibly. Ms. Vasquez, I'm going to be frank with you. The complainants don't seem to understand the difference between harassment and natural consequences. Sharing publicly posted information with employers isn't cyberstalking, and documenting someone's own words isn't harassment. They've essentially filed a complaint about experiencing accountability for their own documented behavior. Elena felt relief mixed with professional vindication. Detective, I'm grateful for your thorough review of this situation. I was concerned they might try to mischaracterize my response as inappropriate. Between you and me, their complaint actually made them look worse. Mr. Delgado admitted to abandoning you at a gas station and filming it for social media, then seemed surprised that there were consequences for that behavior. Ms. Martinez acknowledged posting negative content about her workplace during work hours, then claimed it was unfair for her employer to see those posts. What happens next with their complaint? I'll file my report indicating that no criminal activity occurred and no further investigation is warranted. However, I'd recommend documenting any future contact from these individuals, just in case they escalate their behavior. After ending the call, Elena felt a mixture of satisfaction and renewed determination. Marcus, Brittany, and Jake had revealed their fundamental misunderstanding of personal responsibility by attempting to criminalize the consequences of their own actions. They'd also provided law enforcement with additional documentation of their poor judgment and inability to accept accountability. More importantly, they demonstrated that losing their jobs hadn't taught them the lessons Elena had hoped they might learn. Instead of reflecting on their behavior and recognizing the need for change, they doubled down on victimization narratives and tried to use the legal system to escape the consequences of their choices. Elena opened her laptop and began researching Pinnacle Property Management's tenant violation procedures with renewed focus. If Marcus, Brittany, and Jake couldn't learn from professional consequences, perhaps housing consequences would prove more educational. Jake's extended stay on their couch remained a clear lease violation that could result in immediate eviction proceedings. The property management company's website included detailed information about reporting procedures, violation categories, and enforcement timelines. Unauthorized occupancy violations were taken seriously because they created liability exposure for property owners and violated the terms that other tenants had agreed to follow. Jake's 4-month residency without lease approval was exactly the kind of situation that warranted immediate action. Elena crafted another professional email, this one to Pinnacle Property Management's compliance department. She identified herself as a community member concerned about lease violations at 247 Calle Verde, Unit B, and provided detailed documentation of Jake's extended residency without proper authorization. She included screenshots of social media posts that established Jake's living situation, dates that demonstrated the duration of his stay, and references to the specific lease clauses being violated. The email was factual, professional, and completely focused on legitimate property management concerns. Elena wasn't trying to get Jake evicted out of personal vendetta. She was ensuring that lease violations were properly reported to the responsible authorities. What Pinnacle chose to do with that information was their business decision, based on their policies and legal obligations. At noon, Elena's phone rang with a call from Mrs. Rodriguez. Elena answered with genuine warmth. She'd always liked her elderly neighbor and had no desire to involve her in the drama her grandson had created. Mija, Jake came to see me this morning. He's very upset about some trouble with his friends. He says you've been trying to hurt them because of some misunderstanding. Elena chose her words carefully. Mrs. Rodriguez, there was an incident where Jake and his friends treated me disrespectfully, and there have been some consequences as a result. I haven't done anything inappropriate, but I also haven't let their behavior go unaddressed. Jake says they were just playing a prank that went too far, and now Marcus and Brittany have lost their jobs. He's worried about where he'll live if they can't afford their rent. Elena felt a flash of irritation that Jake was manipulating his grandmother's sympathy instead of taking responsibility for his role in recent events. Mrs. Rodriguez, did Jake tell you what this prank involved? He said they left you somewhere as a joke, but came back to get you. They abandoned me at a gas station, filmed it for social media, and then posted content mocking my reaction. They didn't come back. I had to arrange my own transportation home. They've spent the past several days posting online about how I was overreacting to their harmless fun. There was a long silence before Mrs. Rodriguez responded. Ay, mijo, that's not a prank. That's cruelty. Jake's friends lost their jobs because their employers discovered they'd been posting inappropriate content that violated workplace policies. I shared publicly available information with business owners who had legitimate concerns about their employees' professional conduct. And now Jake is worried about being homeless again? Elena realized this was her opportunity to address Jake's housing situation directly. Mrs. Rodriguez, Jake has been living with Marcus and Brittany for 4 months without being added to their lease. That's a violation of their rental agreement that could get all of them evicted, regardless of whether Marcus and Brittany have jobs. Jake told me it was temporary while he looked for work. 4 months isn't temporary, and Jake hasn't been seriously looking for work. He's been content to let others support him while he figures out what he wants to do. That arrangement was always unsustainable, and recent events have just made the timeline more urgent. Mrs. Rodriguez sighed deeply. Jake's mother spoiled him too much when he was younger. She never made him face consequences for his choices. Now, he's a grown man who still expects other people to fix his problems. Elena appreciated the older woman's clear-eyed assessment of her grandson's character. I think Jake has potential, but he needs to experience some accountability before he'll develop the motivation to make better choices. What do you think will happen next? That depends on Jake. He can find a job, save money, and get his own place like other adults his age. Or he can continue expecting other people to subsidize his lifestyle while he avoids responsibility. The consequences will follow naturally from whichever choice he makes. After ending the call, Elena felt renewed confidence that she was handling the situation appropriately. Mrs. Rodriguez understood that Jake's housing insecurity was a result of his own choices rather than Elena's vindictiveness. More importantly, she recognized that Jake needed to experience consequences in order to develop the maturity and responsibility he'd never been required to demonstrate. Elena's email to Pinnacle Property Management generated a response within 3 hours. The compliance manager thanked her for the report and confirmed that unauthorized occupancy was a serious lease violation that warranted immediate investigation. They would be conducting a property inspection within 48 hours and would take appropriate action based on their findings. Elena felt satisfaction but not celebration. Jake's impending housing crisis was a natural consequence of his decision to violate lease terms while treating the person who'd tried to help him with casual cruelty. If facing homelessness motivated him to find employment and take responsibility for his own life, the consequences would serve their intended purpose. That evening, Elena received a series of increasingly frantic text messages from Jake, Marcus, and Brittany. The property management company had apparently contacted them about the lease violation, and they'd correctly identified Elena as the likely source of the complaint. Their messages ranged from angry accusations to desperate pleas for mercy, but all shared the same fundamental misunderstanding of Elena's role in their current crisis. They seemed to believe that Elena had the power to make their problems disappear by contacting employers and landlords to retract her complaints. They couldn't grasp that she'd simply documented their own behavior and shared it with people who had legitimate interests in that information. The consequences were flowing from their own choices, not Elena's ability to manipulate outcomes. Elena deleted the messages without responding. She'd said everything that needed to be said during previous conversations, and their continued attempts to blame her for their problems demonstrated that they remained incapable of learning from experience. They would have to navigate their current difficulties without her assistance, guidance, or sympathy. Instead, Elena opened her consulting calendar and began planning her next project, a supply chain optimization study for a regional manufacturing company that had requested her expertise in improving their logistics efficiency. Real work for people who appreciated her skills and treated her with professional respect. It was a reminder that her life contained meaningful relationships and valuable contributions beyond the drama that Marcus, Brittany, and Jake had created. Elena had spent 6 months trying to help 3 young people who'd interpreted her generosity as weakness and her kindness as an invitation for exploitation. Their gas station prank had finally shown her their true character, and her response had revealed hers. She was someone who documented problems, communicated professionally with appropriate authorities, and ensured that actions had consequences. Tomorrow, Elena would continue building the life she wanted, surrounded by people who valued her contributions and treated her dignity as non-negotiable. Marcus, Brittany, and Jake could figure out their own futures. She was done subsidizing their poor judgment with her time, money, or emotional energy. Elena woke Friday morning to the sound of persistent knocking on her front door. The digital clock beside her bed read 6:47 a.m. Earlier than any reasonable social call, but consistent with someone experiencing genuine panic. She pulled on a robe and checked the peephole to find Jake standing on her porch, shifting his weight nervously and looking significantly less confident than the cocky young man who'd participated in abandoning her 3 days earlier. She opened the door but didn't invite him inside, maintaining the threshold as a physical barrier that reinforced the emotional boundaries he'd violated. Jake looked exhausted, his clothes wrinkled as if he'd slept in them, his usual swagger replaced by the desperate energy of someone whose safety net had suddenly disappeared. "Elena, please, I need to talk to you. The property management people came by yesterday afternoon, and now they're saying we have 3 days to fix the lease violation, or they're starting eviction proceedings. Marcus and Brittany are freaking out, and I don't have anywhere else to go." Elena studied his face, noting the dark circles under his eyes and the tremor in his hands that suggested he'd been awake most of the night. "Jake, what exactly do you want from me? Can you call them back? Tell them it was a misunderstanding? I wasn't really living there, just crashing sometimes when I needed a place to stay. It's not like I was a permanent resident or anything." Elena almost admired the creativity of Jake's revisionist history, even as she recognized it as another attempt to avoid accountability through selective memory. "Jake, you've been sleeping on their couch for 4 months. Your mail gets delivered. There? You've posted social media content from their address. You told your grandmother you were staying there while you looked for work. Which part of that suggests temporary visits? Okay. Maybe I was there more than I should have been, but it's not like I was hurting anyone. Marcus and Brittany said it was fine." Marcus and Brittany don't have the authority to modify their lease agreement without landlord approval. Their permission doesn't override the legal requirements that govern rental properties. Jake's voice took on a pleading tone that reminded Elena uncomfortably of her younger self begging adults to overlook mistakes she'd made through inexperience rather than malice. But Jake was 22, not 12, and his housing situation was the result of choices rather than circumstances beyond his control. "Look, I know you're mad about the gas station thing, and I get that. It was stupid, okay? We shouldn't have done it, but getting us evicted seems like way too much punishment for one dumb mistake." Elena felt her patience thinning. "Jake, the eviction proceedings aren't punishment for the gas station incident. They're consequences for lease violations that existed, independently of our personal conflict. You were living there illegally regardless of whether you'd ever met me. But you're the one who reported it. If you hadn't said anything, nobody would have cared. The violation existed whether anyone reported it or not. Property management companies have legal obligations to enforce lease terms consistently. Your unauthorized residency created liability exposure they couldn't ignore once they became aware of it. Jake ran his hands through his hair in frustration. So what am I supposed to do now? I don't have first month's rent and security deposit for my own place. I don't have a job that would qualify me for a lease anyway. You're basically making me homeless. Elena recognized the manipulation attempt, but also heard genuine fear beneath Jake's accusations. Homelessness was a serious consequence that she wouldn't wish on anyone, even someone who'd treated her poorly. But Jake's housing crisis was ultimately the result of his own choices to avoid employment, violate lease terms, and exploit other people's generosity instead of building sustainable independence. Jake, you've had 4 months to find employment and save money for your own housing. Instead, you chose to coast on Marcus and Brittany's hospitality while avoiding the responsibilities that come with adult independence. Your current situation is the natural result of that choice. I was looking for work. It's not easy to find something that pays decent money without experience or connections. Elena's military training had taught her to recognize the difference between genuine effort and performance theater designed to satisfy observers without achieving results. Jake's job search had clearly been the latter. Enough activity to justify continued dependence without the commitment necessary to secure actual employment. Jake, in 4 months of job searching, how many applications did you submit? How many interviews did you attend? How many follow-up calls did you make to demonstrate genuine interest in available positions? Jake's silence provided Elena with her answer. His job search had been half-hearted at best, designed to maintain the appearance of effort without risking the possibility of actually having to work. He'd been content to let Marcus and Brittany subsidize his lifestyle while he maintained the comfortable fiction that suitable employment was simply unavailable. Even if your job search had been more serious, Elena continued, living with Marcus and Brittany without being on the lease was illegal regardless of your employment status. Property managers can't make exceptions to lease requirements based on tenants' financial circumstances. So you're just going to let us get evicted? All of us because of one stupid prank? Elena felt a flash of anger at Jake's continued refusal to connect his actions with their consequences. Jake, I didn't create your housing violation, your employment problems, or your financial instability. Those situations existed before the gas station incident and would have created problems eventually, regardless of our personal conflict. But you made everything happen faster. You specifically tried to hurt us. I shared publicly available information with people who had legitimate business and legal interests in that information. Your current problems are the natural consequences of choices you made over the past several months. Jake stared at her for a long moment, his expression cycling through anger, desperation, and something that might have been the beginning of genuine understanding. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter but still tinged with resentment. What if I apologize? Really apologize, not just saying sorry, but actually admitting we were wrong. Would that change anything? Elena considered the question seriously. An authentic apology that demonstrated genuine understanding of why their behavior had been harmful might have meant something 3 days ago, before Jake had spent the intervening time blaming her for consequences he'd created. But his current offer felt transactional rather than genuine, an attempt to negotiate his way out of accountability rather than an expression of real remorse. Jake, what would you be apologizing for, specifically? For the prank? For leaving you at the gas station and filming it and posting it online? And? Jake looked confused. And for not coming back to get you right away? Elena shook her head. Jake, you're apologizing for the mechanics of what happened, not for why it was wrong. You still don't understand that abandoning someone isn't a prank, it's cruelty. You still don't understand that filming someone's humiliation for social media entertainment reveals a fundamental lack of empathy and respect. Okay, yeah, I guess it was mean. We didn't think about how it would make you feel. You didn't think about how abandoning a middle-aged veteran at a gas station might affect her safety, her dignity, or her willingness to continue helping people who treated her generosity as weakness. Jake fidgeted uncomfortably. When you put it like that, it sounds really bad. It was really bad, Jake. And your inability to understand why it was bad, even now when you're facing consequences, tells me that you haven't learned anything from this experience. So there's nothing I can do? You're just going to let my whole life fall apart? Elena felt a mixture of frustration and genuine sadness for the young man standing on her porch. Jake had potential. She'd seen glimpses of intelligence, humor, and even kindness during their earlier interactions. But he'd also developed a pattern of avoiding responsibility and expecting other people to solve problems he'd created for himself. Jake, your life isn't falling apart because of me. Your life is becoming unsustainable because you've been avoiding the basic responsibilities that come with being an adult. Finding employment, paying your own expenses, and securing your own. Housing aren't optional luxuries. They're fundamental requirements for independent living. But I don't know how to do all that stuff. Nobody ever taught me how to find a real job or get my own apartment. Elena recognized the genuine confusion in Jake's voice and felt her anger softening slightly. Jake's mother had apparently failed to prepare him for adult independence, leaving him adrift without the practical skills or emotional resilience necessary to navigate basic life challenges. That failure wasn't Jake's fault, but it had become his responsibility to address. Jake, those are learnable skills. The internet has resources for job searching, apartment hunting, budgeting, and every other aspect of independent living. Community colleges offer courses in life skills and career development. The library has books, computers, and librarians who can help you research whatever you need to know. That sounds overwhelming. What if I can't figure it out? Then you'll make mistakes, learn from them, and try again. That's how everyone learns to be an adult. The difference is that most people start developing those skills gradually during their late teens and early 20s, while you've been postponing that development by relying on other people to handle your responsibilities. Jake stared at the ground for several seconds before looking back up at Elena with something approaching genuine vulnerability. Elena, I know I screwed up. I know the gas station thing was wrong. And I know I've been taking advantage of Marcus and Brittany's help, instead of getting my own life together. But I'm scared. What if I can't make it on my own? Elena felt her military training engaging with Jake's question, the same instinct that had once helped her counsel young airmen who were struggling with homesickness, financial problems, or career uncertainty. But her sympathy was tempered by recent experience. Jake had demonstrated that he was willing to treat her kindness as weakness and her support as an entitlement. Jake, being scared of independence is normal for someone your age. Most people feel overwhelmed when they first start managing their own lives, but fear isn't an excuse for avoiding responsibility or exploiting other people's generosity. So you won't help me at all? Even knowing I might end up homeless? Elena studied Jake's face, trying to distinguish between genuine vulnerability and manipulative performance. She'd made the mistake of allowing sympathy to override judgment before, and it had resulted in months of financial exploitation followed by public humiliation. Jake, I'm willing to give you some practical advice about job searching and apartment hunting, if you're genuinely interested in building independence rather than finding new people to support you. But I'm not going to contact your landlord, lend you money, or provide any kind of ongoing assistance that might enable you to avoid taking responsibility for your situation. Jake's expression brightened slightly. What kind of advice? Elena stepped back from the doorway and gestured for Jake to sit on one of the porch chairs. If she was going to have this conversation, she wanted it to be structured and purposeful, rather than desperate pleading at her threshold. First, you need to understand that finding employment isn't about waiting for the perfect opportunity that matches all your preferences. It's about accepting available work that provides income while you develop skills and experience that might lead to better opportunities later. Jake nodded eagerly. Okay, that makes sense. Second, you need to present yourself professionally even for entry-level positions. That means clean clothes, punctuality, prepared responses to standard interview questions, and the ability to demonstrate that you understand what the job requires. How do I prepare for interview questions if I don't know what they're going to ask? Elena appreciated that Jake was asking practical questions rather than just agreeing superficially. Most entry-level interviews ask similar questions about your availability, your reason for wanting the job, your ability to work with others, and your plans for staying with the company. You can find sample questions online and practice your responses until they sound natural rather than rehearsed. What about finding a place to live without a job? That's more challenging, but there are options. Some landlords will accept applications from unemployed tenants who can demonstrate savings equivalent to several months' rent. Others work with employment verification from new jobs, even if you haven't received your first paycheck yet. The key is being honest about your situation and prepared to provide whatever documentation landlords require. Jake seemed to be processing the information seriously, which encouraged Elena to continue. The most important thing is understanding that independence requires consistent effort over time. You can't wait until you're facing homelessness to start looking for work, and you can't expect other people to solve problems you could have prevented with better planning. Elena, I really am sorry about the gas station thing. Not just because I'm in trouble now, but because it was wrong to do that to someone who'd been nice to us. Elena heard something different in Jake's voice, less desperation and more genuine reflection. It wasn't the complete transformation she might have hoped for, but it suggested that consequences were beginning to teach lessons that advice had failed to convey. Jake, I appreciate that, but apologies are only meaningful if they lead to changed behavior. The question isn't whether you feel bad about what happened. It's whether you've learned enough from the consequences to make different choices in the future. Jake stood up from the chair and extended his hand toward Elena. Thank you for talking to me instead of just slamming the door. I know I don't deserve help after what we did, but I'm grateful you gave me some advice anyway. Elena shook his hand, noting that his grip was firmer and his eye contact more direct than during previous interactions. Facing genuine consequences seemed to be teaching Jake lessons about respect and accountability that months of gentle guidance had failed to convey. After Jake left, Elena reflected on their conversation with mixed feelings. She'd seen glimpses of maturity and self-awareness that suggested Jake might eventually develop into a responsible adult, but she'd also seen enough manipulation and self-pity to remain skeptical about his commitment to genuine change. Time would tell whether fear of homelessness would motivate sustained effort or just temporary performance designed to secure another safety net. Elena checked her email and found a message from Pinnacle Property Management confirming that the lease violation inspection had been completed and eviction proceedings would begin if the unauthorized resident wasn't removed within 72 hours. Marcus, Brittany, and Jake would have to make some difficult decisions about their priorities and their futures. Elena felt satisfied that justice was being served, but she didn't feel victorious. 3 young people were about to learn expensive lessons about accountability, respect, and the consequences of treating other people's generosity as weakness. Those lessons might ultimately help them become better people, but the learning process would be painful and potentially destabilizing. Elena had done what needed to be done to protect her own dignity and demonstrate that veterans deserved better treatment than they'd received. The rest was up to Marcus, Brittany, and Jake. Elena spent Saturday morning reviewing her consulting project materials, but her concentration was repeatedly interrupted by the sound of vehicles pulling into the driveway next door. Through her kitchen window, she could see Mrs. Rodriguez's house becoming a hub of frantic activity as Jake's extended family gathered to discuss his housing crisis. Elena recognized several cars from previous neighborhood barbecues: Jake's mother, his aunt, 2 older men who were probably uncles, and a woman Elena didn't recognize who seemed to be directing the family conference with military precision. Gathering continued for over 3 hours, with animated conversations on the front porch that occasionally grew loud enough for Elena to catch fragments of Spanish mixed with English. She heard Jake's name mentioned frequently, along with words like responsabilidad, trabajo, and consecuencias. Elena's limited Spanish wasn't sufficient to follow the complete discussion, but the tone suggested this was an intervention rather than a sympathy rally. At 2 p.m., Mrs. Rodriguez knocked on Elena's door, carrying a covered dish that smelled like fresh tamales and wearing the expression of someone who'd spent the morning dispensing tough love to family members who preferred easier solutions. Mija, I wanted to thank you for talking sense to Jake this morning. His mother finally heard the whole story about what they did to you, and she's horrified. We all are. Elena accepted the dish gratefully. Mrs. Rodriguez made the best tamales in the neighborhood, and Elena had been subsisting on frozen dinners while managing the ongoing crisis. How is Jake handling everything? Better than expected. His mother gave him exactly the lecture he needed about treating people with respect and taking responsibility for his choices. She's agreed to let him move back home temporarily, but only if he finds a job within 2 weeks and starts paying rent once he gets his first paycheck. Elena felt relieved that Jake would have family support during his transition to independence, even if that support came with appropriate conditions attached. That sounds like a reasonable arrangement. His mother should have done this years ago instead of making excuses for his laziness. Jake's been coasting on other people's kindness since high school, and it was only a matter of time before someone decided enough was enough. Mrs. Rodriguez paused to study Elena's expression with the shrewd assessment of someone who'd raised 5 children and buried 2 husbands. You know, I think you did Jake a favor by holding him accountable. He needed to learn that actions have consequences before he made even bigger mistakes that couldn't be fixed with family interventions. Elena appreciated the older woman's perspective, but felt compelled to clarify her motivations. Mrs. Rodriguez, I wasn't trying to teach Jake lessons. I was protecting myself from people who demonstrated they didn't respect my dignity or value, my contributions. That's what makes it even more powerful. You weren't trying to parent him or fix him. You were simply refusing to accept disrespectful treatment. Sometimes that's exactly what young people need to understand, that their behavior affects other people's willingness to help them. After Mrs. Rodriguez left, Elena reflected on their conversation while enjoying tamales that were significantly better than anything she could have prepared herself. The family intervention suggested that Jake's housing crisis was being addressed through appropriate channels, relatives who cared about his welfare, but weren't willing to enable his irresponsibility indefinitely. Elena's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. This is Marcus. I know you blocked my other number, but I need to talk to you. Brittany and I are getting evicted, and it's all because of what you did. Please call me back. Elena screenshot the message and added it to her documentation file without responding. Marcus was still trying to reframe natural consequences as Elena's vindictive manipulation, suggesting he hadn't learned anything from losing his job or facing eviction. His inability to accept responsibility for his own choices meant he was likely to repeat similar patterns until consequences became severe enough to force genuine change. An hour later, Elena received another message from a different unknown number. Elena, this is Brittany using my friend's phone. I found a new job, but I need a reference from someone who isn't Marcus or Jake. Would you be willing to vouch for my work ethic if an employer calls you? Elena stared at the message in amazement. Brittany had apparently found new employment, but wanted character references from the person she'd recently accused of destroying her livelihood out of spite. The request demonstrated a level of cognitive dissonance that Elena found genuinely impressive in its audacity. She deleted the message without responding. Brittany's employment prospects were her own responsibility to manage, and Elena had no intention of vouching for the work ethic of someone who'd been terminated for violating social media policies. More importantly, serving as a reference would create ongoing contact between them, which Elena had no desire to maintain. Sunday morning brought Elena's first genuine peace since the gas station incident. She woke naturally rather than to her military alarm, made coffee with deliberate slowness, and sat on her back porch watching quail families navigate the scrub brush with their characteristic stop-and-go progression. The high desert landscape stretched toward distant mountains, unmarked by human drama or social media conflicts. It was exactly the kind of morning Elena had envisioned when she'd chosen to retire to this house, this life, this carefully constructed solitude. Her meditation was interrupted by the sound of a car door slamming in her front driveway. Elena walked through the house to investigate and found a middle-aged woman standing beside a late-model sedan, holding a manila envelope and wearing the professional attire of someone conducting official business on a weekend. "Ms. Vasquez, I'm Patricia Chen from Pinnacle Property Management. I wanted to deliver this personally and thank you for bringing the lease violation to our attention." Elena opened the door and accepted the envelope with curiosity. "Thank you for handling the situation so promptly. We take these violations seriously because they create liability exposure for property owners and unfair advantages for tenants who circumvent our screening procedures. Your documentation was extremely thorough and made our investigation much more straightforward." Elena opened the envelope to find a formal letter confirming that the lease violation had been resolved through voluntary compliance. Jake had moved out of the duplex within the required time frame, avoiding the need for formal eviction proceedings. "Ms. Chen, I'm glad this was resolved without requiring more serious legal action." Patricia smiled with professional satisfaction. "So are we. Evictions are expensive and time-consuming for everyone involved. When tenants voluntarily comply with lease requirements, it's usually better for all parties." "What happens with Marcus and Brittany's lease going forward?" "They're on probation for the next 6 months. Any additional violations during that period would result in immediate termination of their rental agreement. They've also agreed to pay an additional security deposit to cover potential future issues." Elena nodded approvingly. Marcus and Brittany were facing ongoing consequences that would require sustained compliance with their lease terms, but they weren't being rendered homeless for their mistakes. The outcome balanced accountability with proportionality in a way that served both justice and practical considerations. After Patricia left, Elena spent the afternoon organizing her documentation files and preparing a comprehensive summary of recent events. Her military training had taught her that after-action reports were essential for learning from experiences and improving future responses to similar situations. This situation had taught her valuable lessons about recognizing exploitation, setting boundaries, and using systematic approaches to address disrespectful behavior. The documentation process also helped Elena gain perspective on how much her life had improved since cutting ties with Marcus, Brittany, and Jake. She no longer received text messages requesting money, rides, or emotional support for problems they'd created themselves. She no longer felt obligated to attend social gatherings where she was valued primarily for her financial contributions rather than her personality or insights. She no longer had to navigate the cognitive dissonance of helping people who treated her generosity as weakness. Elena's phone rang at 4 p.m. with a call from her goddaughter Maria, who lived in Kansas City and checked in regularly to ensure Elena's retirement was proceeding smoothly. "Elena, how's desert life treating you? I saw some photos from New Mexico on social media and it looked gorgeous." Elena smiled at the sound of Maria's voice. Her goddaughter was one of the few people who'd never made Elena feel like an ATM with emotions, who called regularly just to maintain connection rather than requesting favors, who remembered Elena's birthday without prompting and sent thoughtful gifts that demonstrated genuine attention to her interests and preferences. "Desert life has been interesting lately. I had to deal with some people who mistook kindness for weakness, but that situation has been resolved." "Uh-oh, that sounds like there's a story there. Are you okay?" Elena found herself describing recent events with more candor than she'd expected. Maria was an excellent listener, who asked thoughtful questions and offered supportive commentary without trying to minimize Elena's experiences or suggest alternative approaches that might have avoided conflict. Elena, I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. You've always been too generous with people who don't appreciate what you do for them. It sounds like these people needed to learn some expensive lessons about respecting the people who help them. I wasn't trying to teach them lessons, Maria. I was just protecting myself from further exploitation and disrespect. That's even better. You weren't trying to parent them or fix them. You were simply refusing to accept unacceptable treatment. That's exactly what more people need to learn how to do. Elena appreciated Maria's perspective and realized it echoed Mrs. Rodriguez's earlier comments. Both women understood that Elena's response had been about self-respect rather than punishment, boundary setting rather than revenge. Maria, I've been thinking about visiting you in Kansas City. I could use some time away from New Mexico while everything settles down here. Elena, I would love that. When were you thinking? I can take some vacation days and we could explore the city, maybe take a road trip to see some of the national parks in Missouri. They spent 30 minutes planning a visit for the following month, discussing activities, restaurants, and attractions Maria thought Elena would enjoy. The conversation reminded Elena that her life contained meaningful relationships with people who valued her company, for reasons that had nothing to do with her financial resources or willingness to solve their problems. After ending the call, Elena felt lighter than she had in months. The drama with Marcus, Brittany, and Jake was essentially concluded. They were facing appropriate consequences for their choices and learning to navigate adult independence without exploiting other people's generosity. Elena was free to focus on relationships that brought mutual joy and support rather than one-sided obligation. That evening, Elena treated herself to dinner at Los Compadres, partly to support Carlos and Maria's business, and partly to enjoy authentic, New Mexican cuisine without having to cook or clean up afterward. The restaurant was busy with families celebrating Sunday dinner together, creating the kind of warm atmosphere that reminded Elena why she'd chosen to build her retirement life. In Santa Fe, Carlos recognized her from across the dining room and came over to her table during a quiet moment. Ms. Vasquez, I wanted to thank you again for bringing that social media situation to our attention. We've had several compliments from customers about improved service quality since we addressed that staffing issue. Elena smiled at the unexpected feedback. I'm glad things are working out well for your business. We hired someone new who understands that representing our restaurant is a privilege that comes with responsibilities. It's made a big difference in our workplace culture. As Elena drove home through the desert evening, she reflected on how dramatically her life had improved since she'd stopped tolerating disrespectful treatment from people who'd viewed her generosity as weakness. She'd eliminated sources of financial drain, emotional manipulation, and social stress that had been weighing on her well-being without her fully realizing their cumulative impact. The gas station incident had been painful and humiliating, but it had also provided Elena with the clarity she'd needed to recognize exploitation that had been disguised as friendship. Marcus, Brittany, and Jake had done her an inadvertent favor by revealing their true characters so dramatically that she couldn't rationalize or minimize their disrespect. Elena pulled into her driveway and sat in her car for a moment, looking at her house silhouetted against the star-filled desert sky. This was her sanctuary, her refuge, her carefully constructed space where respect was the minimum standard for entry. She'd protected it successfully from people who'd confused her kindness with weakness, and she'd done so without compromising her own integrity or stooping to their level of behavior. Tomorrow, Elena would continue building the life she wanted, surrounded by people who appreciated her contributions and treated her dignity as non-negotiable. Marcus, Brittany, and Jake could figure out their own futures without her assistance, guidance, or financial support. The lesson was complete, the boundaries were established, and Elena was finally free to enjoy the retirement she'd earned through decades of service to others who'd actually valued her efforts. 6 months later, Elena stood at the podium of the Santa Fe Veterans Community Center, looking out at an audience of 43 people who'd gathered for her presentation titled, "Dignity is Not Negotiable: Setting Boundaries After Military Service." The crowd was more diverse than she'd expected, not just veterans, but spouses, adult children, and community members who'd heard about her story through word-of-mouth recommendations and social media shares. Elena had never intended to become a public speaker. The presentation had evolved organically from conversations with other veterans who'd experienced similar exploitation, people who'd recognized patterns in their own lives after hearing about Elena's experience with Marcus, Brittany, and Jake. Word traveled through veteran networks, social media groups, and community organizations until Elena found herself fielding requests to share her story with audiences who needed to hear that kindness didn't require accepting disrespect. How many of you have ever been told you're too sensitive after someone treated you poorly? Elena asked, watching hands rise throughout the room. How many have been accused of overreacting when you set boundaries around your time, money, or energy? More hands rose, accompanied by knowing nods and murmurs of recognition. Elena had learned that her experience with financial exploitation and social humiliation wasn't unique. It was part of a broader pattern affecting veterans who'd been trained to serve others, but never taught to protect themselves from people who mistook service for weakness. Today, I want to talk about the difference between helping people and enabling them, between being kind and being a doormat, between serving your community and sacrificing your dignity for other people's entertainment. Elena clicked to her first slide, which showed a simple equation: respect given plus respect received. Sustainable relationship. The formula had emerged from months of reflection on why some relationships in her life thrived, while others had drained her resources and undermined her well-being. Military service teaches us to put mission and people before ourselves, Elena continued. That's a valuable principle that creates strong units and accomplishes important objectives. But in civilian life, some people will exploit that service mentality if we don't learn to recognize the difference between people who deserve our help and people who demand our compliance. Elena told her story chronically, walking the audience through 6 months of financial exploitation, the gas station abandonment, and her systematic response to people who'd mistaken her generosity for stupidity. She shared screenshots of social media posts, documentation of expenses, and communications with employers and landlords, all with names redacted to protect privacy while illustrating principles that transcended individual circumstances. I wasn't seeking revenge, Elena emphasized. I was seeking accountability. There's a crucial difference between those two motivations, and understanding that difference determines whether your response to disrespect creates positive change or just perpetuates conflict. During the question and answer session, Elena fielded inquiries that revealed the depth and breadth of exploitation that veterans faced in their civilian relationships. Adult children who treated military pensions as family ATMs, employers who demanded unpaid overtime from veterans who'd been trained never to abandon their duties, friends who disappeared when veterans needed support, but reappeared whenever they needed favors. The hardest part, said a woman in the third row, is that people expect us to be grateful for any attention or inclusion, even when that inclusion comes with a price tag we never agreed to pay. Elena nodded emphatically. Exactly. People assume that because we served our country, we should be honored to serve them too, regardless of how they treat us in return. But service is a choice, not an obligation, and it should be offered to people who value what we bring to the relationship. After the presentation, Elena was approached by Patricia Santos, a reporter from the Santa Fe New Mexican who'd been covering veteran affairs for the past 5 years. Patricia had attended the presentation specifically to interview Elena about her experience and its broader implications for veteran advocacy. Elena, your story has resonated with veterans throughout the Southwest. Have you considered writing a book about this experience? Elena smiled at the suggestion. Actually, I've been working on something. Not just my story, but a practical guide. For veterans who want to build healthy boundaries without losing their commitment to service and community, what would that look like? Chapters on recognizing exploitation, documenting inappropriate behavior, working with professionals to address violations, and building relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided obligation. The goal isn't to make veterans suspicious or selfish. It's to help them channel their service mentality toward people and causes that deserve their investment. Patricia took notes enthusiastically. That could be incredibly valuable. Do you have a publisher? I'm working with a small press that specializes in veteran issues. The tentative title is Standing Orders, A Veteran's Guide to Civilian Boundaries. 6 weeks later, Elena received an advance copy of her book in the mail. The cover featured a simple design, military dog tags on a background that transitioned from camouflage to civilian colors, suggesting the transition veterans made from military to civilian life. Elena's author photo showed her in professional attire rather than military uniform, reinforcing the message that veteran identity could evolve beyond military service without losing its core values. The book launch event at a local bookstore drew over 60 people, including several faces Elena recognized from her original presentation. Mrs. Rodriguez attended with Jake, who'd maintained steady employment for 4 months and moved into his own apartment with a roommate who shared rent and household responsibilities equitably. Jake approached Elena during the book signing portion of the evening, carrying a copy he'd obviously already read. The pages were dog-eared and filled with sticky note tabs. Elena, I wanted to thank you for what you wrote about second chances and accountability. I've been using your framework to evaluate my relationships and make sure I'm contributing fairly to the people who help me. Elena studied Jake's face, noting changes that suggested genuine maturity rather than performance designed to elicit sympathy. How's that working out for you? Better than I expected. When you actually contribute to relationships instead of just taking from them, people treat you differently. They invite you to things because they want your company, not because they feel obligated or because they need something from you. Elena signed Jake's book with a personal message. Growth requires courage. Keep choosing accountability over comfort. The book's success surprised Elena and her publisher. Within 3 months, Standing Orders had sold over 5,000 copies and generated speaking requests from veteran organizations across the country. Elena found herself traveling to military bases, veteran centers, and community colleges to share her message about dignity, boundaries, and the difference between service and servitude. During a presentation at Fort Carson in Colorado, Elena met Sergeant Major Rebecca Williams, who'd been struggling with similar issues involving financial exploitation by her ex-husband and his family. Rebecca had read Elena's book and implemented several strategies that had helped her regain control over her finances and social relationships. Your book literally saved my retirement savings, Rebecca told Elena after the presentation. I was heading toward bankruptcy because I couldn't say no to people who'd trained me to believe that saying no meant I was abandoning my military values. How are things different now? I still help people, but I help them strategically rather than reflexively. I choose recipients based on their character and reciprocity rather than just their need or their relationship to me. It's made my generosity more effective and my life more sustainable. Elena's speaking tour eventually brought her back to Santa Fe for a homecoming presentation at the same Veterans Center where she'd first shared her story. The audience this time included over 80 people, many of whom had read her book and implemented her strategies in their own lives. Elena looked out at the crowd and felt deep satisfaction at the community that had emerged around principles of mutual respect and strategic service. These were veterans who'd learned to value their own dignity while maintaining their commitment to helping others, people who'd discovered that setting boundaries actually enhanced their ability to serve effectively. When I was abandoned at that gas station, Elena concluded her presentation, I thought I was experiencing the end of some friendships. What I actually experienced was the beginning of understanding my own worth. Sometimes the people who treat us worse do us the biggest favor by showing us exactly what we should never accept again. Elena closed her laptop and looked directly into the camera she'd set up to record the presentation for her new YouTube channel. If this story resonates with you, if you've experienced similar exploitation or struggle with setting boundaries around your generosity, I want you to know that you're not alone. Subscribe to this channel for more content about veteran boundaries, civilian relationships, and strategic service that protects your dignity while helping others. She paused to let her words settle before continuing. And please, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what boundary-setting challenges you're facing in your own life. This community exists to support each other through the transition from unlimited service to strategic service, from reflexive helping to intentional helping. Elena looked at her subscriber count, 1,247 people who'd found value in her message, and wanted to hear more. It wasn't massive by YouTube standards, but it represented 1,247 veterans and veteran supporters who were learning to value themselves while serving others. Remember, Elena said, looking directly into the camera with the same steady confidence she'd once used to counsel young airmen. Dignity is not negotiable. Service is a choice, not an obligation. And sometimes the best way to honor your military values is to refuse to let civilians exploit them. Elena ended the recording and began planning her next video. She had stories to tell, boundaries to teach, and a community to build around the radical idea that veterans deserved the same respect they'd shown their country. The gas station where she'd been abandoned was now just another stop along the highway, a place she drove past occasionally without emotional reaction. But the lessons she'd learned there had become the foundation for a new mission, helping other veterans understand that their service mentality was a strength to be protected, not a weakness to be exploited. Subscribe, share your story, and let's build a community where respect is the minimum standard and dignity is never up for negotiation.